So in this video, we're talking about the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who I'm reading about in a Pre-Socratic's reader. Now, Heraclitus, as with many of the pre-Socratic philosophers, is an interesting and complicated guy. In the introduction here to him, one of the things that it says about him is he had a reputation for both misanthropy and obscurity. One of his traditional nicknames was the Riddler, although I've also seen this translated as the Obscure, both of which I like. I'm also something of a misanthrope, so I'm down with that. And I like the idea that he just goes around saying obscure things that people then write down because they're so wise. The former probably based on his rude references to a number of historians and other philosophers, and the latter on the enigmatic paradoxes he generates in expounding his views. So, I mean, one of his great sort of misanthropic things that he says, according to Plutarch, is that corpses are more fit to be thrown out than dung. So, not a big fan of people. The thing about his misanthropy that I'm not really on board with is that Heraclitus is anti-democratic. Because he doesn't like or trust people, he doesn't think that power should be vested in the people, although it's not necessarily clear from the fragments, at least in this collection, what sort of government he actually does favor. But at one point he does say, one person is 10,000 to me if he is best. So he's definitely not a supporter of democratic rights. Probably he would be more comfortable with something like Plato's philosopher kings as developed in Plato's Republic, but Heraclitus isn't super clear about what kind of government he would support. So the other thing that Heraclitus is really, really interested in is a kind of epistemology, which, as we talked about in the video with Xenophanes, is the way in which we know what we know. So one of Heraclitus's big ideas is that wisdom is not the same as knowledge. And so what that means ultimately is you can have a lot of information, but if you don't understand it in a context and you haven't considered it rationally, then you're not wise. So the introduction here again says, the simple collection of facts will not result in knowledge. Rather, there must be insight into an understanding of the significance of these facts. A fundamental part of this insight is seeing how all that is known constitutes a unity. Heraclitus himself offered signs of this unity in his paradoxes about the unity of opposites. He insisted that despite the fact that there is universal change, there is a single unchanging law of the cosmos, the logos which both underlies and governs these changes. Thus, one who understands the logos can understand the workings of the cosmos. The physical sign or manifestation of the logos is fire, an element that is always changing, yet always the same. So this to me is really cool because this seems like Heraclitus is thinking along the same lines as the Taoists of Chinese philosophy, Lao Tzu and his followers. The fundamental insight of Taoism is that the universe is one. There is a way, the Tao, and the Tao simply is. Like, whether we as humans resist it or comply with it makes no difference. The universe will unfold the way that it should. And this seems to me somewhat along the same lines that Heraclitus is thinking. And Taoists are very interested in the idea of the balance of opposites, that things that seem contradictory are brought together. We also see this kind of philosophy in Buddhist koans, these paradoxical statements that are meant to expand the way that we look at things. So, and we see that with Heraclitus. Like in some ways, he would be very, very comfortable, I think, in Eastern philosophy. So, one of the things that's central, unlike the Taoists, who obviously use the term Tao for the way, Heraclitus uses the term logos. And in Greek, logos is multifaceted. There's a ton of different potential meanings depending on the context in which this term is being used. So it can mean discipline, as in a scientific discipline, biology, biologos. It can mean argumentation structure, as in rhetoric. It can mean individual words. For Heraclitus, it seems like a kind of overarching governing structure for existence. So the world functions according to a set of rules, and those rules are knowable if you understand the logos, if you understand the guiding force. And again, this is the Taoist insight. If you can understand the way, then you can comprehend the universe. You can do what existence requires of you, maybe. So some of the things that we get here, this logos holds always, but humans always prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. For though all things come to be or happen in accordance with this logos, humans are like the inexperienced when they experience such words and deeds as I set out, distinguishing each in accordance with its nature and saying how it is. But other people fail to notice what they do when awake, just as they forget what they do while asleep. So again, this idea that the universe unfolds according to central governing laws that are comprehensible but not easily comprehensible. This is kind of at the heart of Heraclitus's philosophy. He's very, very skeptical of traditional forms of wisdom, and that's something that's important because this aligns him with the skeptics of Greek philosophy and things like this. For instance, he challenges the idea of popular forms of knowledge, traditional popular forms of knowledge. He says, what understanding or intelligence have they? They put their trust in popular bards and take the mob for their teacher, unaware that most people are bad and few are good. Again, there's misanthropy there. But this idea that we shouldn't trust people like Homer and Hesiod to reveal the truth. We shouldn't trust folk wisdom. We shouldn't trust things that most people agree with just because most people agree with them. We need to consider them rationally. We need to consider them skeptically. And again, Heraclitus insists on understanding something in its context, understanding the implications of it, understanding things critically. He said, much learning, or polymathy, does not teach insight. Otherwise it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras, and moreover Xenophanes and Hecataeus. So he's taking issue here with people who are widely regarded to be wise because they know a bunch of different things. And what Heraclitus criticizes is that they don't know and they don't have enough depth to their thought. Whether that's a fair assessment or not is somewhat open for debate. But Heraclitus believes that this is one of the cardinal virtues, is to think critically and to critically assess knowledge and information in order to understand it. And he says this in a number of different ways. For instance, at one point, Stobaeus recounts that he says, thinking is common to all. And later, it belongs to all people to know themselves and to think rightly. And interestingly enough, Plutarch records just this three-word phrase, I searched myself, which is interesting because that almost aligns Heraclitus with René Descartes, the 17th, mid 1600s, I think. I forget Descartes' dates, sorry. But René Descartes, French philosopher who famously coined the term that in English is often translated as "I think, therefore I am." And this idea that self-knowledge is the most readily available and fundamental idea is really central to a lot of philosophy coming out of the Cartesian tradition, the tradition from Descartes. Heraclitus seems to be anticipating this in a way, and the importance of knowledge and of skepticism, of questioning what we can know and how we know it. But he believes that wisdom is important. He believes that wisdom is central. And he says, wisdom is one thing, to be skilled in true judgment, how all things are steered through all things. He also says, let us not make random conjectures about the greatest matters. And he says, right thinking is the greatest excellence, and wisdom is to speak the truth and act in accordance with nature while paying attention to it. So again, this idea that wisdom, knowledge, even virtue is rooted in the logos, is rooted in this grand universal or cosmological system of truths, and that human beings can come to know that through skepticism, through critique, through interrogation of knowledge, etc., etc. But one of the things that's really central and interesting, fascinating about Heraclitus is this idea of the unity of opposites, that we can start to recognize the fundamental nature of the universe by recognizing that things that seem to contradict one another actually don't. So he says, listening not to me, but to the Logos, it is wise to agree that all things are one. He also says, things taken together are whole and not whole. Something which is being brought together and brought apart, in tune and out of tune. Out of all things there comes a unity, and of a unity all things. And he says, one of his critiques of others who are less wise than he is that they do not understand how, though at variance with itself, it agrees with itself. It is a backwards turning attunement like that of the bow and lyre. So that's interesting. Because again, this idea that like things that are contradictory are not contradictory. Things that appear to be at odds with themselves are actually part of an overarching unity. This is, again, a very Taoist type insight. The yin-yang, for instance, a Taoist symbol that, most people I think are familiar with. The premise of the yin-yang is that you have a united symbol that contains the opposites of black and white in these curves. But Heraclitus often presents these contradictions or these paradoxes through these short epigraphs that are almost